Hey folks, it is April the 26th, and this is our U.S. History 1302 dual credit course. And we are in the middle of the Civil War. Well, actually, we just started the Civil War, right? When we left off last time, we were talking about the firing of Sumter and the formation of the Confederate States of America. Lincoln is calling in the troops. Everybody's getting ready for what they think is just going to be the best thing since sliced bread. And there. So we are going to have our final exam on Friday. It will be due no later than Monday. And so can't turn it in past that because I have to submit the grades to TJC early next week. So that's it. If you got a doctor's excuse, we might be able to push it to the next day. But Tuesday next week, I'm going to probably have all day administering an EOC, and then another one Wednesday, another one Thursday. And so next week we're going to be busy down here on the Tyler Classical Academy end. So can't do it. All right. So I believe I uploaded these notes into the. Didn't I? I think I did. If you're interested in the Civil War, there's a really good documentary series. I spent a whole day watching it. If you want to watch all of them, it's by a guy named called Ken Burns, and it's titled "The Civil War." It's pretty good. He had multiple historians pouring into it, lots of quotes from people who were there, descriptions of battlefields, personal letters of people during this. It's pretty good. It's got a lot of semantics to it. So if you like being drawn in like at an emotional level, it's pretty good at that too. So I don't know if you can find it for free though. You might find like a few episodes for free on YouTube. They yank it down because PBS owns the rights and they want to sell it. So the way it is. So moving on past there. So the armies are formed. The Confederates had their initial battle plan. Their initial strategy was to draw the war out, kind of like what guerrilla forces tend to do, until the opposition gives up. However, we are going to see one push that almost wins it for the South, and this is the First Battle of Bull Run, also called Manassas. Both the North and South believed that the war could be relatively quick.
Didn't we have to like write a paper on this or something?
On Manassas, I am not entirely too sure. I know for 8th grade, I've had papers on Frederick Douglass once or twice. I don't know if I did that with y'all. I don't know. But so Union General Irvin McDowell made the first move by attacking Confederate General Beauregard near Washington, D.C. So remember, Virginia is very close to Washington, D.C., and Virginia is the capital of the Confederate States. And so Beauregard thought he could make a push and capture D.C. And if you capture the United States government, well, guess what? You might just win the war. Union troops were undisciplined and poorly trained, however, allowing the Confederates to position themselves. This is going to be a big problem for the Union throughout much of the war. Is one, they're going to have incompetent leadership, and two, they don't really have anything they're fighting for. And by that I mean it's rather abstract. Whereas the Confederates had it in their heads, they were fighting for something that was more material and close to their hearts. For the average Confederate troop, who had nothing to do with slavery because he was too poor to own one, was fighting for his home. Whereas the Union soldier was fighting for a bigger idea, like the United States, for the Union, for cohesiveness, because you were told to. And so it didn't quite, you could find that the morale was lower at first for the Union. That will turn around. And there were some people who really were fervently fighting with their hearts to do things like end slavery or to bring the United States back together or to put down traitors. But for the most part, the morale was kind of low. The battle came on July the 21st, 1861, where you have Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson came in with Confederate reinforcements. Stonewall Jackson is going to be one of those Confederate leaders that is going to turn defeat into victory time and time again. He was very well loved by his men, and he always went to the lead of battle. He was a very religious man too. He was during battle. It was said he would raise up one of his hands, his left hand or his right hand, and he wouldn't lower that hand until the end of the battle. So where have you heard something like that before? Yeah. So yeah, like that, right? Like the whole time. So where do you think he got that idea from? Moses and Aaron, yeah. They're like, hold my arms up. So they had to hold his arm. They got tired, so they'd hold his arms up during the battle while the Jews were fighting. So yeah, he saw himself as essentially like reenacting that. Like he believed it. And that's one thing, even Lincoln recognized this. Both sides are very religious, and both sides believe that they're fighting with God on their side, that they are the people who are doing the right thing, right? But in any case, Stonewall Jackson caused the Union to flee in panic straight into a crowd from Washington who came to watch the fight and enjoy a picnic. So both the armies, this is the first battle, like real battle after Sumter. So whenever people hear, hey, both the armies are meeting up, remember, both sides are very arrogant and think that it's going to be like a game where both sides are going to meet up. The one's going to scare the other to go home. It's going to be a great victory. And so you're actually going to have like senators and congressmen bring their families up on a hill above this to go watch in a picnic. But whenever the Union Army starts running away, the Confederates are actually going to capture them and take them captive and take them back home. So you're going to have, people from Congress who are going to be Confederate prisoners because they decided to come watch. The only reason the Confederates didn't push into Washington and take it right there is because it was almost a stalemate. They were beaten down pretty badly. And just like the North, they were also facing discipline problems. So they actually almost had it. This battle, oddly enough, is going to be essentially the front yard of a man who's going to be so sick of the war, he's going to watch this fight, that he's going to sell his home here, and he's going to move to the same place that Robert E. Lee is going to surrender. And so it's one of those ironies of history. The front yard of the guy where this battle happened, he's going to sell the place, and his house is going to be used at the end of the war for peace. So it's kind of a strange little, I forgot his name. It was like a strange little twist of history. It's one of those things that's like too strange to just be accidental, you know?
Yeah.
So, all right, moving on. Transitions. All right, so more on the First Battle of Bull Run, Manassas. Davis ordered the army to invade D.C. That was the Confederate commander, but the Confederates were also disorganized, like I said earlier. Lincoln then fired McDowell and appointed, that's the Union general, and appointed this guy, George B. McClellan, to create what would be called the Army of the Potomac. He was like, we need to make the army bigger and better. George McClellan, do it. He's like, sure, whatever, Lincoln. He's going to regret it, though. McClellan is going to be like Lincoln. He's going to be one of the main reasons why the war takes so long for the Union. He is going to be staunchly opposed to his boss, Lincoln, and it's just going to be a disaster. And so the Army of Potomac was to be created to defend the capital and attack Virginia, the Confederates' capital. McClellan then spent months training 185,000 men into a well-drilled, well-equipped army. And he was the type of soldier who wasn't what you would call a fighting soldier. Like when I was in the army, we would call him a barracks soldier, right? He's the type of guy who loved having clean, pressed uniforms. Like they said, he would spend time looking in the mirror, examining how good his uniform looked on him. He was a very vain man. In his personal letters that we have from his family, he had like Napoleon syndrome, constantly talking about his greatness, about how God himself appointed him to save the United States of America, and how the whole weight of the world rested on his shoulders. But it's okay because he had the best shoulders, and on and on and on and on and on. And so
It's okay because I have the best shoulder.
And so he spent all this time teaching the soldiers how to drill and parade, um, and all of these things that had to do with parade style military discipline. But he always held back the troops from combat. Whenever Lincoln urged him to use the army, McClellan would actually ignore the president's orders. Lincoln decided to demote this guy, but still left him in the army. But he's going to have other commanders that are going to be that are going to like not work out too well. And so we're going to see this where McClellan's put in charge, knocked down, put in charge, knocked down, and where the people he promotes above McClellan are going to do really poorly as well. And so at this time, the Confederates, with a smaller army and less equipment, are going to make some really good gains on their side. Because they are going to have very good commanders, such as Stonewall Jackson
And Robert E. Lee.
and Robert E. Lee and William Bedford and so on and so forth. Whereas, the Union will get their own tacticians, strategists. It's going to take some bloodshed. It's going to take some time, some lessons learned. Let's move on. So, that's Ulysses S. Grant in the background there. So, enter Grant. While McClellan was stalling the bulk of the Union Army, other Union generals were actually trying to fight the war. Such as in the West, you had, remember we were talking about this last time, we were talking about the Anaconda strategy. The idea of strangling the South from all trade, and that's by cutting their access from the Mississippi River and to the ocean. By doing so, they were able to then surround and push into the South. Well, Grant was trying to do this. He managed to push down the Mississippi River Valley in 1862, taking 2 Confederate forts, along with Grant. And Grant, the way he was fighting was very different. Like McClellan, as we will see, he is going to be very risk adverse. And by that, I mean he put the mission second. He was always trying to keep his troops safe to the point of constantly losing the war. Whereas Grant was ruthless in his ability to throw his own men into the meat grinder to make sure his mission came into fulfillment. And so it was brutal. It lacked any elegance and led to a lot of deaths, but it worked, right? So, along with Grant, his friend, William Tecumseh Sherman, together they fought against General Beauregard in the Battle of Shiloh. This battle had massive casualties and brought the reality of war to many Americans. Like these casualty numbers were all through the newspapers. And so like on the Union side, they lost 13,000 people. The Confederates lost 10,000. And to the Confederates, you got to remember, they had a lot less population. So this really hurt them. And so these were like extreme numbers to people. This made the American Revolution look like a fist fight, where we have just one battle, this many people rendered incapable of fighting or dead.
This is more deadly for the U.S. than World War II.
Exactly. That's the thing. The Civil War is going to be awful. We're going to see that people are going to go up to the telegram offices and they're just going to wait for the list of names every day of people who died. You're going to have in the especially in northern cities, poor farming communities where a lot of their young men went off to fight, where they're going to be literally depopulated of young men. Like they're all going to die. It's going to be tragic. You're just basically going to have towns where it's just women, children, and the elderly. And Shiloh is going to be the first of many battles with extreme casualty numbers. And a lot of it has to do with the style of fighting they were doing. These folks were out there like chess pieces, doing volley fire into walls of only humans. Lead balls that whenever they hit organs, they were very devastating because the lead will change shape, hot lead changing shape as it enters somebody. And it's soft enough when it hits bones, it splinters into something that will never heal again. Cannon fire, and just foolish mistakes, noise and confusion, infections that'll never heal. Backwards, mid 19th century medicine, where the only remedy for many things was just amputation. And you're probably going to bleed to death, die of infection, or even of shock from the sheer pain of having a saw go down you to take off limbs. So it was a very, very brutal war. And they're going to eventually learn piece by piece ways to try to prevent these kind of casualties. But that's only going to lead to some of the innovations of World War I that are going to be so rough. So, as one young Confederate soldier put it, death in every awful form, if it really be death, is a pleasant sight in comparison to the fearfully and mortally wounded. And so yeah, like Grant, like they say that war was the only thing he was successful in. Even when he does eventually become president, many historians rank him as one of the worst presidents in U.S. history. He spent most of his time drunk and gambling. His friends would get positions, and then without even telling him, they would wind up doing awful scams, theft on the American people without him being aware of it. So he's going to get some bad flack. He's going to be a severe alcoholic for most of his life. Whereas Robert E. Lee graduated top of his class at West Point, Grant was also a fellow classmate, but he graduated last. Almost got kicked out. He's going to spend a lot of his time farming, and he hates farming, so he works in a leather shop. And when he comes back in the military, though, this is where he's going to find his calling. This is where it's going to be. And Tecumseh Sherman, his friend, they both apparently Sherman saved Grant from dying of alcohol poisoning, and Grant saved Sherman by checking him out of a mental institution. So they're just a couple of peas in the pot. Transitions. All right. So, however, there were some Navy components to the Civil War, especially for the North. Then Union Admiral David G. Farragut led the Navy to take New Orleans, the shipping and banking center of the South. Remember Anaconda Plan. New Orleans is where you have it at the mouth of the Mississippi River. And so that's a big shipping lane. A lot of our exports and imports in the South are through New Orleans. And it's been that way all the way up even before the War of 1812. And so this is where the Confederates were hoping to rein in their cash and supplies from selling to the British and through smuggling. And also Galveston. The Navy then went on to decimate the Confederate fleet there. Now, it wasn't like a major fleet. A lot of them were essentially civilian ships that were fitted with some cannons. The Navy, however, was always a federal thing because nations keep navies. You usually don't have like a smaller state keep naval ships. They brought the upper Mississippi under Union control. And so that, plus the forts that Grant got, was part of the Anaconda Plan. So they had the Navy controlling the ocean. They had the Mississippi River controlling shipping north and south. Lincoln and most Northerners believed that taking the Confederate capital for Richmond would help end the war. But they're wrong, because the Confederate government in Richmond didn't have a lot of power. They weren't getting a lot done. They couldn't get a lot done. And a lot of them were just kind of not really into it, apparently. They were kind of fleecing the whole situation. But what's going to end the war is the end of the Confederate Army. It's going to take time, but the Northerners are going to figure that out. The Confederates realized this and sent troops to defend Richmond. So it's going to be a major point of defense for them. Meanwhile, off the coast of Virginia, ironclads fought. These armored ships, the Confederate Virginia and the Union Monitor, fought until both gave up due to their impenetrable armor. So you had these coal, steam-powered boats with steel siding that the cannons of the time could not penetrate. Literally, they just waded up to each other and kept shooting at each other until they ran out of ammo and went home. It would be the one and only battle of these kinds of boats. They were both seen as futile, so neither was deployed again. In this meantime, McClellan finally decided to use his army. So he's been sitting on it, he's been polishing him up, marching him around, making him look good. And now he's like, Mr. Lincoln, I'm ready to go fight. It's like, okay, thank you. About time. Picture of McClellan in the background. All right, so, and this brings us to the Peninsular Campaign. And so, despite all advice, McClellan wanted to lead his army against Richmond in an amphibious assault from the south. So, Washington, D.C., of course, is north of Virginia. And it just made sense for them to march straight through. He was going to take a great risk by essentially sailing them around the coast, bringing them in from the south of Richmond instead, in what would seem to be a surprise. Now, if you remember in the Korean War, that was actually quite successful whenever surprised the North Koreans to take back much of North Korea up until the Chinese got involved. So it's not a totally bad idea. McClellan was totally indecisive, however, when he landed the troops. Despite his superiority in number, he always believed the Southern forces outnumbered his own. And that was always a problem for McClellan. He was always so risk adverse and paranoid that his scouts would come back and tell him, sir, there's only 5,000 troops. And he would always say, that means you only saw 5,000. The other 45,000 must have been hidden. So he would always times the number times 10. And so he just wouldn't commit his troops into battle. He always thought the enemy was stronger than it really was. He finally fought the Confederates at Seven Pines, but would not budge afterwards. He waited for reinforcements that he didn't necessarily need. He had a very good victory in this battle, but when he could have capitalized on this victory and moved on to Richmond, Virginia, he decided to wait until he had enough troops to make him feel more comfortable. Not strategically necessary, but to make him feel comfortable. And if you remember, that was a problem in the Mexican-American War. But that was out of necessity because Santa Anna had knocked them down so hard. Meanwhile, Stonewall Jackson defeated 3 Union armies in the Shenandoah Valley near Washington with a very small, poorly equipped set of forces. And he was notorious for having very fast, speed-forced marches where he would go in with his army and they would move very fast, often at night, surprise attack a much larger army, decimate them, and then vanish, and then move on to another one. And so it was like blitzkrieg. It was very fast warfare. And he was a master of terrain. He always knew where to take his troops to keep them safe and where to attack to capitalize and multiply their numbers. It's like a force multiplier. And all of this is happening while McClellan is stalling. So you see in the South, they're decisive, they're aggressive, and they're taking advantage Whereas in the North, they're too cautious. When they get momentum, they lose the momentum. Robert E. Lee then takes charge of the Confederates in Virginia and forced McClellan into a defensive position. So McClellan had victory, but because he stayed put, now a superior general is coming to oppose him, and now he finds himself on the defense. So it's not looking too good for the North. They threw everything they had at him, and then they made some mistakes. I mean, that's kind of how it is. Leadership can change everything, whether it's leadership in the military, leadership at a job too. Like you can do a really crappy job, but if you got somebody like a really good boss, it makes it a lot better. So, however, if you have the perfect job, but your boss is like a nightmare, that's no good. No bueno. Folks, let's move on to the next one. And now we move on to the second Battle of Bull Run. So yes, there were two, not just one. Lincoln then tried to replace McClellan with General John Pope, but Pope lost badly to Lee in the second Battle of Bull Run. So Lee is pushing back north. Pope comes up against it, loses real bad, not too good. So once again, we see like a lack of decisive, great leadership in the North. They got a lot of troops, they got a lot of money, they got a lot of guns, but they don't have the brain behind it. Without knowing what else to do, Lincoln puts McClellan back in. He was like the best he had. Lee was emboldened and convinced Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, remember, that he should invade Maryland with 3 objectives in mind.
Man, I forget that man exists.
Davis?
Jefferson Davis.
Yeah.
He's just not mentioned ever.
Well, the thing is about Davis is kind of like like he was a famous. He was famous in Congress before the Civil War, right? And then he's president of the Confederacy, and yeah, he didn't have a lot to do there. But when he really steps into history, is after the Civil War. He's going to be put in house arrest, basically in a mansion. And he's going to write these memoirs and essentially the Southern perspective history of the Civil War. And it's going to be like this very romanticized idea and stuff like that. And so that's going to be like a bestseller here in the Southern states and stuff during Reconstruction and afterwards. And so he's going to kind of become a celebrity after the Civil War, really.
How do you remember all of this? Like all these little stories?
Just Dave. I'm sorry, I just Dave. I'm in the middle of a book now, American Revolution book about Francis Marion. So sometimes
You're always reading a different book.
Yeah, I'm also getting a phone call. From Franklin, Tennessee. Sorry, Franklin, Tennessee. You don't know me. All right. I don't know. I just it's what I went to school for. But I mean, a lot of it's stuff that I remember after school, right? Like a lot of the stuff for the Civil War, since I didn't specialized in early European history, a lot of the stuff like Civil War is either from reading or listening to other people's lectures and stuff, So, and especially especially like when I'm first teaching a class. I'm like, oh crap, what do I do? Well, I'll do it this summer. After I get the assignment, I'll study it, right? And so like I'm just remembering things from back when I studied before in prep before my first year. Some of the best professors I had would study before every class period. They would go over their notes and look stuff up if they needed to before their lecture. And so that could be like a good 30 minutes to 10 minutes before class. And so that had an impact on me. So sometimes I do that. Not always, but sometimes. All right, so Lee's objectives. Lee wanted to take the fighting out of Virginia. And why did he want to take it out of Virginia?
That was his home state.
It was his home state and the Confederate Army, and more important, the capital, but the Confederate people were on the brink of starving. Remember, it was an agriculture-based economy, but most of it wasn't for growing food. And so Virginia and a lot of the South were trying to grow crops so that they could actually eat. They were facing hunger. They had money shortages. They couldn't trade. And so he was trying to get the fighting out of there so that the farmers that were there could actually harvest the crops and feed the South. So that's one reason why, yeah. But I guess the capital and stuff like that. He also hoped that slave owners in Maryland would join his army. Remember, Maryland is actually kind of considered a southern state. Maryland chose not to secede, but he believed that because so many Marylands were tied to the slave economy, that they would join them kind of like as brothers and sisters and stuff like that. So he's like, hey, we got beliefs, right? Number 3, he believed that a victory in the heart of the Union would lead to international recognition for the Confederates. Well, see, the Confederates had been sending delegates to other countries like France and Britain and be like, hey guys, we're a new country. Will you please recognize us and trade with us and let us buy guns and stuff? And they're like, whoa, wait. You're part of the United States. I don't know what's going on down there, but we're going to stay out of it until y'all are done fighting. And so like, shoot, okay. Well, they figured if they could have victories, because remember, in the American Revolution, Washington had a major victory, and that led to France and Spain recognizing us. And the help from France, super helpful, because then all of a sudden the French were like giving us shiploads of gunpowder, because apparently you need a lot of that when you're shooting a lot of guns and cannons. And also, eventually, you remember, their Navy and their Army to help us out. They're hoping for something like this all over again. They're like, please, this is like American Revolution 2.0. Can you help us? People weren't quite convinced, but they were hoping a big victory in the North would do it. Lee then divided his army into 3 forces and crossed the Potomac. So the Potomac is that river that kind of separates Virginia from the North. So they're like, let's do this. Let's bring it on. Let's have American Revolution 2.0, and Lee could be the next Washington. At least that's what they were hoping. Didn't quite turn out that way.
Unfortunately not.
Yeah.
I mean, fortunately. Unfortunately for him.
There's an ironclad in the background. Oh yeah, that's actually Stonewall Jackson in the background. I'm thinking about reading a biography of that one sometime. I really like biographies. It's like my favorite kind of histories is I like reading biographies because I like trying to like somebody or reading about them. I like reading about the histories of ideas. Sometimes.
So have you read Mein Kampf?
No, I haven't. I've read a lot of Nietzsche though. I've read about half of what Nietzsche wrote, and I disagree with almost all of it. But it's weird reading Nietzsche. Is like your bad half talk. Like, yeah, I recognize you. Yeah, it's like I don't know. Gosh, he hated Christians. Man,
Not really.
All right, so moving on. Wait, where are we at? Oh yeah, here. My bad. All right, so the Confederate push north. Lee almost lost it all when Union troops found his orders secretly wrapped around cigars carried by a messenger. Remember, the Union didn't have like telegraph lines and stuff. So Lee had to send messages to his army the old-fashioned way and hope and pray that they got the message. When you have three armies moving, and they're supposed to be moving on a timeline, like you're supposed to be here this day, this time, or else we won't have our backup or somebody watching our flank. I mean, it's hard to get people to walk in a straight line. It's hard to get a marching band to walk the way you want it to. It takes training and time. And if you don't have communication, it's not going to happen. And so he sends messengers out to these other two armies with his plans to invade Maryland. The Union soldiers capture one of them, find the secret plans, and run it up their command. McClellan had Lee's plans on exactly where the armies are going to go. But McClellan thinks it's too good to be true and delays again, allowing Lee to figure out, I haven't heard back from other guys in a while. Oh, shoot. And so he turned around. Their armies, however, did shortly meet at the Battle of Antietam Creek, the bloodiest single day of the war. More died there than double the War of 1812 and the War with Mexico combined. So this was massive, devastating death. Lee retreated back towards Virginia after these losses. Lincoln fired McClellan for good this time after letting the Confederates go. But don't worry, McClellan will be back because he's going to try to run against Lincoln for presidency. He's going to be like, that guy was an idiot. I was going to win the war and save all you people. But then he had a big top hat. He was just there in the way. So the Union general, Commander General Ambrose Burnside, then attacked the Confederates at Fredericksburg, but lost due to a foolish full frontal assault. So you can't necessarily do that. That's one thing. I mean, just you like one of the key things ever since people were just fighting in melee was you need to have a flanking force. You have to collapse aside or in some way or another and come from the rear or the left or the right. But he decided to go man on man, full frontal into a very well prepared position that chopped his Union troops until they were defeated and retreated. Lincoln was prepared to deliver the Emancipation Proclamation, but he held on to it. He had been spending time corresponding with Frederick Douglass, big anti-slavery, get the people their freedom, Frederick Douglass. But he had the Emancipation Proclamation, which will free all slaves captured from the southern states. But he needed a victory. He needed a morale victory. He wasn't just going to deliver it while they were losing. It would have been seen as like somebody like getting bullied and saying some kind of insult while you're being bullied. It doesn't work if you're getting punched in the face. And you can call somebody's names, but it's going to look like it's coming from a position of weakness. So he needed it to come from a place of strength. But he needed a victory, and he wasn't getting that from Burnside. He didn't get it from McClellan. So McClellan might have hurt Lee's army, but he lost a massive amount of his own forces in Antietam. And a lot of it was because of his own incompetence. So we weren't there.
I feel like a normal person probably could have done better than McClellan,
I wouldn't know about that. I wouldn't know, honestly.
from what I hear about.
Well, he was the wrong man for the job, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
he doesn't sound like the right man for the job, that's for sure.
Well, they say the French had the same problem like World War One. A lot of the people in charge of the French military were just in these positions where they inherited it basically, and they spent most of their time just kind of doing this kind of stuff. They were so full of themselves they couldn't actually do their own job. So that's why a military needs to be based around utility, not vanity. They have to be goal-oriented towards the mission, towards accomplishment. Otherwise, you fail. All right, so don't worry. The Emancipation Proclamation is real, and it did happen 5 days following the Battle of Antietam, where Lee was eventually driven back, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which abolished slavery in the South of the states in rebellion and would go into effect January 1st, 1863. This did not free all the slaves. That will take a constitutional amendment, the 13th Amendment. That's going to be long after Lincoln's death. But this will be seen. He's going to use this based on the theory of warfare, to where to the victor goes the spoils. So the Supreme Court said that enslaved people were property. So he says, fine, I will confiscate the South's property, and since they're mine, I will set them free. Makes sense. This decree was when the war changed from one of union, keeping the states together, to one of freedom for a people. So people see this as the shift from when the Civil War was about keeping the U.S. together to where more and more people started to use it as in order to free the slaves. So, in the meantime, the North and South faced problems filling their ranks. In the North, they would try to fix this with the Conscription Act of 1863. So conscription is the draft. Hey, citizen, you're part of our country. You fill in this age, this gender, you're going to the military. Establish the draft, but here's the kicker, allowed rich people to buy their way out. So what you could do, if your name came up for the draft, you could have somebody fill in for you. And so wealthy individuals would pay like a poor farmer or something like that. Like, hey, I really don't want my son dying. I'll give you a bunch of money if you go fight instead. Oh, okay. Well, if they're really poor people, they're like, well, I might make it and then I'll have some money. The South enforced a draft, but here's the kicker for them. They also had something called the 20 Negro Law, which exempted rich plantation owners from fighting in the war. So if you were a slave owner who owned 20 people, you were deemed worthy to stay home and you didn't have to fight. So a lot of Southerners became extremely resentful for this. They're like, wait, hold up. So we're over here, no shoes, no food, dying and fighting, so that the guy who owns 20 or more slaves can sit home and be safe. And so the rationale behind this is like, well, we can't have these guys leave. Then they'll have a slave revolt. And you don't want that, do you? But to the guys fighting, they had more sense than that. And so you're going to see a big loss of morale in the South. It's going to turn, remember, the Southerners had good morale at first because they were fighting to protect their home. But now they're going to be like, wait a second, my home, now I'm fighting so that some guy I never met can stay comfortable in his mansion. Yeah, that's going to be a big morale loss, right? All right, so, and the North is going to have a morale boost because more and more people are going to be like, you know what, yeah, we're fed up with this slavery stuff. Look what's happened to us because of this. It's time to end it. So both governments faced criticism, however, for conscription. This was seen as something that was anti-liberty. You know, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Well, you kind of lost your life if you have to go die in a war you didn't volunteer for. So it did face quite a bit of criticism, especially since you could buy your way out of it. Or if, on both sides, if you're basically rich enough, you didn't have to go fight. So it was like the rich man's war, but the poor man's battles. So of course, I'm not saying it's any different from today. So I mean, it's just how it is.
And it might just be how it always will be.
Oh, probably until the robots do it for us,
That would be
or
nice.
the nanobots. They just kind of disintegrate us. All right, let's move on to the next one. We're burning right through it. I said, oh yeah, this is a war memorial for the 54th Massachusetts. So that was an all-black Union army. Have you ever watched the movie Glory? It was a good Civil War movie. The movie Glory, like Denzel Washington and Morgan Freeman, some other guys in it. It's like from the early 90s. It's a good Civil War movie. You'll cry. You'll like it.
Honestly,
I'll
no,
look it
Julia.
up.
Not you in particular, anybody.
No, we were I was watching a movie last night.
Uh-huh.
It was so sad.
Oh, of
It
course
made
you
me
cried.
cry.
Of
Cat in
course
the Hat?
you
The
cried.
dude like had a daughter, but then they falsely accused him, and they threw him in jail. And they wouldn't let him see his daughter and his grandmother, and then his grandmother died, and then now the little girl is an orphan, so she had nowhere to go. It was really sad.
Yeah. Jeez.
I don't remember. I don't know what to put it.
So it wasn't the Cat in the Hat. Okay. I was wrong.
It was
Well-
the Cat in the Hat.
What was it?
Okay. So
I knew
Um,
it.
this is going to be our last one for today, hit the 45-minute mark. So, North and South. During Lee's Maryland campaign, many of his troops were barefoot and hungry. And so, this is the thing. Remember, he was supposed to march into Maryland, get a big victory, and then all of these like pro-slavery, pro-Southern Marylanders would be like, you know what, I changed my mind. I'm going to join the Southern Army. It didn't work. Firsthand accounts of people who saw the Confederate Army marching through Maryland were like, they look like they're starving. Their clothes are rotting off their bodies. They had major supply issues. They were like, they're unshaven. They stank like they ain't bathed. It was just like, they were like, I'm not joining this. And so it didn't work out at all the way Lee thought it would. In fact, it just made people think that they really were going to lose. So, whereas the North could produce 5,000 rifles a day, the South could only produce 300 at best. And that's after they eventually started opening up a rifle factory here too. Though the South was agricultural, like I said earlier, most of the crops were cotton, tobacco, and other cash crops, not food. So they were really about trying to make money on foreign markets that they had no access to. As the South suffered from lack of supplies, they were also running out of military-age men. They were dying and being crippled, and they couldn't replace them. The North had twice the population, and they began creating African-American units, such as the 54th Massachusetts. Lincoln faced continuous troubles with leadership, however. That was always his weakness. Following McClellan, he prompted Burnside, then Joseph Hooker, who was defeated by Stonewall Jackson at Chancellorsville. Then George E. Meade, who was fired for letting Lee get away at Gettysburg. And then finally, he's going to move on to Grant, because he's going to hear stories where Grant is somebody who is aggressive. And these generals he had before were constantly not aggressive, not aggressive, not aggressive. Not aggressive to the point of losing or letting the opposition get away. What's up?
Grant was too aggressive.
Well, he won the war. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to have been one of his troops. You know, like, no, not me. Well, I don't know. See, that's the thing. Like,
I love
when you look at these things, like in hindsight, like, I don't know. Like you're like, man, that was terrible. But if you were there and if you're part of that esprit de corps, and it was your era and all that stuff, I don't know, maybe so. Because like, I don't know, when I was young, gosh, I used to fantasize about battle all the time. I was like, yes, this is what I was made for. Because you're dumb. You're dumb when you're a young man. You think you think everything's going to be okay, or if it's not okay, it's going to be glorious anyway. So, I don't know.
Yes, this is hard.
But in any case, we're going to finish the Civil War. We got a few more slides. We're going to get back on Wednesday, and we're going to hit the meat and potatoes for so we got like 6-7 more slides for the Civil War, and we're gonna go through some of the streamlined portions of Reconstruction. On Friday, you're going to have a final exam over the Civil War, Reconstruction. It's not cumulative, but it's going to be due on Monday. But I strongly suggest you do it Friday. See you later. In fact, I'm going to ask those other two to stay in here on